Our brains are strange. They are too big. They burn too much energy. And for a long time, we haven't been sure why. If you look at the long arc of evolution, most things happen slowly. A fin becomes a slightly different fin over a million years. A tooth gets a little sharper, but human brains didn't follow that pattern. They exploded. In a relatively short evolutionary window, the brain of our ancestors tripled in size. This wasn't a small tweak, it was a complete renovation. It's one of the biggest and fastest evolutionary changes we know of. The question is, why? What happened to us, out on the savannas of Africa, that made this hungry, heavy, and dangerous organ the best ticket to survival? There isn't one simple answer. It seems to be a story of feedback loops. One change created the conditions for another change, which in turn pushed the first change even further. It's a messy mix of food, climate, and, most importantly, other people. To get a handle on it, we need to look at the timeline. Our story doesn't start with us, Homo sapiens. It starts with our much older relatives. Go back about 3 or 4 million years, you'd find hominins like Australopithecus, the famous Lucy, being one of them. They walked on 2 legs, which was a huge deal. It freed up their hands, but their brains were not much bigger than a modern chimpanzee's, around 400 to 500 cubic centimeters. They were smart for their time, for sure, but they were not us. For millions of years, this was the basic model. Bipedal ape, small brain. Then, around 2.5 million years ago, things started to shift. We see the first members of our own genus, Homo. The first one is called Homo habilis, or handyman. Their brain was a bit bigger, maybe 600 cubic centimeters. Not a massive leap, but a definite step up. They were associated with the first simple stone tools. These weren't fancy spears. They were rocks that were deliberately broken to create a sharp edge. It sounds basic, but it was a revolutionary technology. It let them do things they could never do before, like scrape meat off bones or crack them open to get the rich marrow inside. This was a new way to get high-quality food, and high-quality food is brain food. The next big player on the scene is Homo erectus, and this is where the story really takes off. Homo erectus appeared around 2 million years ago. Their brains were much bigger, starting around 800 cubic centimeters and growing to over 1,000 in later populations. This was a doubling of brain size from Australopithecus. Erectus was a different kind of hominin. They were taller, more like us. They made much better tools, like the iconic Acheulean hand axe. These tools were not just broken rocks, they were shaped, symmetrical, and clearly the result of a plan. You had to have a mental template in your head, and then execute it. That takes more brain power. Homo erectus was also the first hominin to leave Africa. They spread out across Asia and parts of Europe. This tells you they were adaptable, they could figure out how to survive in new environments with different foods, predators, and climates. There is also evidence, though it's debated, that they were the first to control fire. Fire is a game changer. It provides warmth and protection, but more importantly, it lets you cook your food. Cooking is like outsourcing your digestion. It breaks down tough fibers and proteins before they even enter your body. This makes food much easier to digest and unlocks way more calories and nutrients. This leads to a key idea called the expensive tissue hypothesis. The idea is simple. Brains are incredibly expensive. Your brain is only about 2% of your body weight, but it uses about 20% of your energy when you're resting. You can't just evolve a big brain for free. You have to pay for it somewhere. So where did the energy come from? The hypothesis suggests a trade-off. As our ancestors started eating higher quality, easier to digest food thanks to tools and cooking, they didn't need a huge energy-intensive digestive system anymore. Our guts could shrink. A chimpanzee has a much larger gut than we do for processing all that raw plant matter. The energy saved by having a smaller gut could be rerouted to building and maintaining a bigger brain. So better food didn't just provide fuel, it may have restructured our entire energy budget to make a big brain possible. So we have a possible mechanism. A better diet and cooking allowed the brain to grow. But that just explains how it could happen. It doesn't explain why the evolutionary pressure was there in the first place. Why was a bigger brain suddenly so useful? One of the most powerful explanations is the social brain hypothesis. It was developed by an anthropologist named Robin Dunbar. He noticed a pattern across primates. Species that live in larger, more complex social groups tend to have larger neocortexes, the part of the brain involved in higher level thinking. The idea is that living in a group is not easy, it's cognitively demanding. You have to keep track of who is Who is your friend? Who is your enemy? Who is the boss? Who owes you a favor? Who is a reliable partner? Who is a cheat? You have to manage alliances, navigate conflicts, and understand the intentions of others. It's a constant political game. For early humans, living in a group was essential for survival. It offered protection from predators and help with finding food. But as these groups got bigger, the social complexity would have skyrocketed. An individual who was better at navigating the social world, who could form strong alliances, outsmart rivals, and be a good cooperator, would have been more successful. They would have had more access to resources and more opportunities to reproduce. Their genes for a slightly better social brain would have been passed on. This creates a kind of evolutionary arms race. As everyone gets a little bit smarter socially, the bar gets raised. You need an even smarter brain just to keep up. The main evolutionary pressure wasn't predators or finding fruit anymore. It was the other brains in your own group. We were, in effect, forcing ourselves to get smarter. This idea links up with another one called the ecological dominance social competition model. It argues that once humans got good enough at dealing with their environment, once we could handle predators and reliably find food, the primary challenge to our survival was other humans. Competition between groups for territory and resources, and competition within groups for status and mates became the main driver of intelligence. We had to be clever not just to hunt a deer, but to outwit the neighboring group who also wanted that deer. We needed to cooperate with our own group members better than they cooperated with theirs. This intense competition, human against human, could explain the rapid increase in brain size. We were our own biggest problem, and a bigger brain was the solution. But the world our ancestors lived in wasn't stable. This brings us to another major theory centered on climate change. The period when our brains were growing rapidly, the Pleistocene epoch, was a time of extreme climate instability. Ice ages came and went. The world swung wildly between cold, dry periods and warm, wet periods. In Africa, this meant the environment was unpredictable. A forest might turn into a grassland. A reliable water source might dry up. The foods you depended on might disappear, and new ones might appear. This is the basis of the variability selection hypothesis, championed by Rick Potts of the Smithsonian. The idea is that our brains didn't evolve for any one specific environment. They evolved to be adaptable. A bigger brain is a problem-solving machine. It allows for flexibility, planning, and innovation. When the world is constantly changing, the specialist who is perfectly adapted to one thing dies out. The generalist, the one who can figure out a new solution on the fly, is the one who survives. Can't find your usual fruit? Maybe use that big brain to figure out how to dig up tubers or how to hunt a new kind of animal. The constant environmental chaos would have placed a huge premium on the ability to learn, remember, and come up with novel solutions. Our brain is the ultimate survival tool for an unpredictable world. These major theories, diet, social complexity, and climate, are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they probably all worked together, feeding into each other. Imagine a scenario. The climate is changing, making food harder to find. A group of hominins with slightly better tools and better cooperation skills is more successful at getting meat. The high-quality meat diet allows for their brains to grow a little bigger. Those bigger brains make them even better at social cooperation and at innovating new tools. This allows them to live in slightly larger, more effective groups. Living in these larger groups creates more social pressure, which in turn selects for even bigger brains. It's a powerful feedback loop. Diet enables brain growth, which improves social skills and technology, which helps get better food, which enables more brain growth. And we can't forget two other huge factors that are part of this loop tool use in language. Making a stone tool, especially something like a hand axe, isn't just about hitting rocks together. Yes, it requires foresight. You have to pick the right kind of rock. You have to see the tool inside the rock before you start. You have to strike it at just the right angle with just the right amount of force. It requires fine motor control and a lot of learning. This process itself might have shaped the brain, strengthening the connections between vision, motor control, and planning. Then there's language. We don't know when complex language evolved because it doesn't fossilize. But it was likely a gradual process. The ability to communicate complex ideas would have been a massive advantage. You can teach someone how to make a tool without them having to figure it out from scratch. You can coordinate a hunt. You can share information about where to find water or where a predator was last seen. You can build a shared culture and history. Language allows for a level of cooperation that is impossible without it. The pressure to communicate more effectively would have driven the evolution of the parts of the brain that handle language, like Broca's and Wernicke's areas. And once language existed, it would have made social life even more complex, adding another layer to the social brain pressure cooker. We had to track not just what people did, but what they said, what they meant, and whether they were telling the truth. This all leads to a more recent idea that ties everything together, the cultural brain hypothesis. This theory suggests that the real secret to our success is culture. Culture is all the knowledge, skills, and beliefs that we learn from other people. For humans, culture is our primary survival strategy. We don't have to reinvent the bow and arrow or how to make a fire every generation. We'll learn it. The key insight is that this creates a new kind of evolutionary loop. The more culture there is to learn, the more selection there is for bigger brains that are better at learning it. And individuals with bigger brains are not just better learners, they are also better innovators. They might invent a slightly better way to make a tool or a new hunting strategy. This new innovation then gets added to the cultural pool, making it even more valuable to have a brain that can learn it. So you get this coevolution of genes and culture. Culture gets more complex, which puts a selective pressure on our genes for bigger, better learning brains. Those genetically smarter brains then produce even more complex culture. This feedback loop could explain the explosive runaway growth. We weren't just adapting to the physical environment or the social environment. We were adapting to a cultural environment that we ourselves were building. The need to be able to download an ever-expanding cultural software package drove the evolution of our neural hardware. After Homo erectus, the brain size trend continued. We see the rise of species like Homo heidelbergensis, a likely common ancestor of us and Neanderthals. Their brains were even larger, well within the modern human range. Then came the Neanderthals, and us, Homo sapiens. Neanderthals actually had, on average, slightly larger brains than we do today. This is an important point. It shows that sheer size isn't the whole story. The shape and organization also matter. Neanderthal brains were longer and lower, while ours are more globular or rounded. This different shape might reflect differences in wiring, with perhaps our brains having larger parietal lobes, areas associated with sensory integration, imagery, and tool use, and a larger cerebellum involved in learning and complex coordination. It's possible that after a certain point our brains started to get more efficient rather than just bigger. In fact, the human brain has actually shrunk slightly in the last 20,000 years. One theory for this is that with the development of complex societies and writing, we started to outsource some of our memory and cognitive tasks. You don't have to remember how to do everything if you can rely on specialists or look things up. Our brains could become more streamlined and efficient, but getting this big brain came with some serious costs. It wasn't a free upgrade. The first and most obvious cost is childbirth. A big head has to fit through a narrow pelvis. This is a fundamental obstetric dilemma. The solution nature came up with was to have human babies born incredibly early in their development. A human baby is essentially a fetus, completely helpless and unable to cling to its mother or find its own food. A baby chimp can hold on to its mother's fur. A baby horse can walk within an hour of birth. A human baby can't even hold its own head up. This has massive consequences. It means human infants require a huge amount of care for a very long time. This long period of dependency is a major burden on the parents, especially the mother. But it's also an opportunity. It creates a long window for learning, where the brain can develop and be shaped by the culture and environment it's born into. It also requires intense social cooperation. A mother on her own would have had a very hard time raising a child. She needed help from the father, from grandparents, from the rest of the group. Our big brains and the way we are born may have locked us into being intensely social and cooperative creatures. It forces us to create families and communities. The other major cost is energy. That 20% of our daily calories is a huge bill to pay. It meant that early humans were living on an energetic knife's edge. A few bad days of hunting could be a disaster. It required a consistent supply of high-quality food. This dependence on calorie-dense food likely drove our ancestors to become better and better hunters and foragers, developing more complex strategies and technologies to ensure they could pay their brain's energy bill. And there might be more subtle costs. Is our propensity for anxiety and overthinking a side effect of a brain designed to constantly simulate social scenarios and predict future threats? Is our complex consciousness, with its awareness of mortality, a byproduct of this cognitive explosion? A big brain can be a powerful tool, but it can also be a heavy burden. So when we ask why our brains got so big so fast, the answer isn't a single headline. It's a messy, interconnected story. It's a story about the world changing and forcing us to be more flexible. It's a story about learning to get better food, like meat and cooked tubers, which gave us the fuel we needed. But most of all, it seems to be a story about each other. We got smarter to cooperate with and compete against other humans. We created complex social worlds and rich cultures, and then our brains had to adapt to keep up with the world we had made for ourselves. The pressure of the group, the need to communicate, to teach, to learn, to navigate a web of relationships, this seems to be the engine at the heart of it all. We were caught in a feedback loop where being smarter made our lives more complex, and that complexity demanded that we become even smarter. It was a runaway process that was risky and expensive, but it paid off. It gave us language, art, technology, and the ability to dominate every corner of the planet. We are the descendants of the hominins whose brains were best able to handle this chaotic, social, and cultural storm. The result is the strange, powerful, and ever-hungry organ that sits inside each of our skulls today, still trying to figure it all out.